Like I said, if you preview it, you'll notice that it's not working, and there's a couple reasons for that. One is basically we created these columns, right? But they're not actually attached to anything down here, right? These are still just using the CSS we made before. These are here, ready to be used, but they're not being utilized. The other thing is that we're also missing some of the CSS that we do have in here is actually going to be in the way. So this says like absolute, right? And these all say inline block. These are all dealing with the positioning of the elements, and these are going to override the stuff that we have above. So we have to get rid of some of this as well. And then the last thing is we actually have to set up a meta tag that will set up basically the initial scale. So right after, let's do that first, get that out of the way. So right after this, you're just going to go ahead and do a meta. The name of the meta is going to be viewport, right? So this meaning this is kind of the name of it, and now we're going to give it a value, right? So that is going to be content equals quotes, and the content is going to be this. The width, crap, that's not where I meant to put it. In here, sorry. Width is equal to device hyphen width, comma, initial hyphen scale is equal to 1.0. Just like that, and then close it. And I don't know why it's giving me... Oh, I wrote met. It's supposed to be meta. Maybe that's why the whole thing wasn't auto. There we go. And what this is going to do is it's just going to set up that the viewport is what we're seeing. That's like the content of the site. It basically all you're doing is you're just setting up the initial scale of the web page. You're just going to say, okay, this is one. This is where it's starting at, and it needs this in order for some of the more advanced stuff in order for them to be responsive correctly. Okay. So that should always be in there whenever you're doing a responsive website. You need to have that at the top. Okay. So the next bits basically is let's just go ahead and add let's get rid of, let's go ahead and we'll add our rows and columns below. So this is actually pretty easy. So for the rows, if you look at our web page or website here, don't mind that. If we look at our website here, you're going to see, come on, buddy. There it goes. The way we have it set up is that we have 1, 2, right? So there's 2 elements. This is 1 row, 2 columns, and then another row and 2 columns. And you can kind of tell right here, right? So we've got this header is basically 1 row, and the content is 1 row. And then this should be a column, this should be a column, this should be a column, and this should be a column. So all we have to do is actually, we don't even have to remove this class. We're just going to add row to it. So I'm just going to do row. And then on the content one, I'm also going to add row. Okay. So those are our 2 rows. That was pretty easy. No big deal. Now, this needs to be inside of a div that's going to use one of our column classes. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grab H1 and figure, the 2 inside pieces, just hit tab so that they're tabbed in. And then I'm going to make a new div class. And we'll just do col-4 and then close it out. And then I'm going to take the closing of that element, the closing tag. I'm just going to put it there, right? That way, this H1 is nested inside of this. And it's going to say, make it 4 column width, right? So, if you look up here, that means it's going to make it 33.33%. All right, so that's the width it's going to get. We're just going to do the exact same thing around this figure. So we're gonna go div class, and this time, if this is 4, if you remember, the columns must equal 12, right? Because we're doing 12 columns per row. So if that's 4, this one has to be 8. Okay. If we want this one to be less, then we'd have to make this one more. That's the idea. So anyways, we're gonna col-8, and then we'll close it out. And I'm gonna put the closing of the div down here, like so. We're going to tab that back. There we go. Okay, so that one's good. So we have this, and then the figure is outside of it, and we have this one, and that's inside of that. And we're just going to do the same thing down here. Now, this is actually going to be even easier because we're not going to use the paragraph. We're just going to go ahead and change the name of it. We don't need paragraph. The only reason why we made paragraph last time is because I was trying to put them in line to each other, so I could have two columns. But now that we actually have this system, we're just going to use the system we're building instead of manually writing it in there. We want this all to be part of the same grid, so they're all bumping up against each other and making the right, the placing themselves correctly. So it's just going to be COL-6. I'm just going to make a 6 column, and we'll do the same thing here, COL-6. Okay, and that should be pretty good. So let's save it, and if we preview it, I gotta change my default here from whatever this is, Edge or something. You'll see that it's sort of working. It kind of looks the same because most of what we did was the same. But the other reason is this. So the reason why it's not working exactly the way that we were hoping for is the CSS that what I mentioned earlier, the CSS that we wrote before is actually overriding and sort of not allowing the other things to happen. So for instance, notice like this, see how the website just gets cut off? That's because if we look up here, right here, we made the width 960, which means that the whole thing fits in 960 pixels. If I get rid of that, which you should too, okay, and then I'll save this, and if we go back here, and I'm just going to refresh it, you'll see that now, all right, see how that now this is basically text wrapping? It's sort of almost like a fluid or liquid layout. That's a little bit better because it's not forcing it to be 960. Now it's just whatever the size is. Okay, so we have to remove some more of this in order to make the rest of this work better. Because if you'll notice, the top still isn't really, it's not shifting around. See how it's still where it is? So we got to fix that as well. So the rest of the body is fine here, but if you look, you see we have font size that's 54 pixels. It's not the worst thing in the world, but that works really well if you're doing a fixed width site. So we made our site absolutely 960 pixels. So if we say 54 pixels, it means it's going to look the same regardless. It's just going to go on whatever. However, if you want something that's going to expand or contract, it's actually better to either use percentages, which not really so much, or EMs. And if you remember, EMs is the default size of an M in the browser. Okay, so it's sort of a more liquid way of working. So I already know what I want to put in here. So I'm going to take out the 54, and instead I'm going to write 3.5 EMs. Okay, and the way I figured that out is that I started out with 1 EM, which is the default size, and then I made it 2, and then I just tested it and see, oh, okay, that looks better, that doesn't. So that's a little bit better. Now the next thing here is that we have text line right, that can stay, that's fine, but position absolute. When we do an absolute position, it means it's going to 100% put it in that one position, regardless of anything that's around it. Pulls it out of regular flow. So if we have absolute, it's not going to pay attention to the grid. So what we need to do instead is just change this to relative. Now we could get rid of it altogether, but the reason why I can't is I actually still need to use this part here, the positioning part, because if we don't do that, because we rotate it at 90 degrees, where the pivot is, it actually makes the text go off the screen, like it goes beyond the top of the screen. So I need to push it. Remember, when you have the thing here, you're pushing away from it. So I need to push away from the top, so push it down 125 pixels. But again, same things before. I don't want to use pixels. It's better to use EMs. So I'm just going to take that out, and we're just going to do 2.75 EM, okay? Not EMX. Now, you'll see this says left 0 pixels. That's fine. 0 pixels, 0 EMs, 0%. They all mean the same thing. They're all 0. So you can just leave that. That doesn't matter anyway. But just, I mean, you can put EMs to make it feel better, but it's the same thing. Okay, the figure. This is actually pushing it to the right. So it's pushing off of the left 250 pixels. I actually don't want that. That's actually not going to look as good. So I'm actually going to remove that. We're going to leave figure there because I'm going to add some stuff to it later. Now the content, if you see content, right, that's this whole big area, right, because this has content on it. It's inline block. Again, I did that just to help with positioning. I don't need that anymore, so I'm just going to take that guy right out of there, okay? That is not going to help me. The other thing I want to do is I'm going to get rid of margin, and the reason for this is, again, if I have margin in there, it's actually going to push it out of the grid, because remember, margin, if you have like a block, if you watch my mouse here, right, let's say I have this block here like this, the margin is the gap between that block and the next item, so that'll move it over and shift it off the grid, and I don't want that. Padding's fine because it's from the outside of the element, the outside of it to the content within, So it won't actually change the scale of it as much. It should fit fine, but you don't want the other thing. Paragraph we don't need anymore. We got rid of it anyway, so it's not doing anything. So we're just going to go ahead and get rid of that. Our paragraphs are using the grid system that we made, so it's not going to affect anything. So go ahead and save that now. Control S or Command S if you're on a Mac, and then you can hit Control R or F5. Depends on your site or what you're. But now if you look, notice that this is always kind of staying in the center here, right? Looks a little bit better, and you can see it's all kind of fluid now. It's all doing what it's got to do. All right. Now it's not so much responsive. We still need to fix that, but we have a good start. It's using a grid system that's somewhat fluid. It's just not shifting maybe as dynamically and as much like we're not making a lot of decisions about how it looks depending on the scale. That in order to do that, we're gonna have to add a little bit more code. But this is a good start.